Well, we're going to break this all down for you now with our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons. Rob, let's start with the Chinese here. What are they hoping to get out of these talks today?
Well, just being there already is symbolically very important for President Xi, I think. This is a man who in recent times has spoken an awful lot about China being encircled almost by the United States, by the United States trying to stifle the Chinese economy and its natural expansion. And his efforts to prevent that happening have found an ally in Russia. They share a lot of points of view in common, and there's no doubt that by coming to Moscow, Xi is hoping to strengthen his position on the global stage. He achieves that relatively easily just by coming to Moscow. The Russians can't demand very much of him, but just by being there, he gets something out of it. The question, I suppose, will be now, though, what is he prepared to give to the Russians in return? Not very much, I would suspect. Will he give weapons? I think it's unlikely. China at the moment is trying to embellish its reputation as a global power. It's just come out of helping the Iranians and the Saudis sign a peace deal. Unlikely that anything similar will happen with Ukraine, despite the fact that the Chinese have put forward a peace plan. That has been derided in the West, particularly because it calls for cessation of hostilities without condemning the invasion of Russia in the first place. John F. Kirby, the White House spokesperson, has described that as being ratification of Russian conquest. There hasn't been a proposal to balance the visits to Moscow by talking to the Ukrainian president about a possible summit or even a discussion on the phone with him about that. So China finds itself, I think, in a difficult situation, but benefits simply by allying itself with a major country, which allows it to confront the United States in a way which it wouldn't be able to do otherwise, without having to make a lot of concessions.
So that's what China might get out of these talks today. What about Russia, given the fact that China might not be giving Russia that much?
Look, the very fact that Xi Jinping has arrived in Moscow already means an awful lot to Vladimir Putin. This is the most senior foreign official, foreign leader to arrive in Moscow since the end of COVID. The fact that Xi Jinping, one of two global superpowers, is arriving in Russia at the time when Russia is involved in the biggest war on the European continent since the end of the Second World War, speaks volumes. The problem, I think, for Vladimir Putin is he would clearly like China to go much further than just giving it moral support. And at the moment, it's not much more than moral support. There has been some suggestion that the Chinese are helping the Russians bust sanctions, particularly on computer chips and that sort of thing, which the Russians can then use for their weapons development. Clearly, the Russians want military support from the Chinese. I think it's unlikely that the Chinese will go that far at the moment because they regard it as being in their interests to present themselves as a responsible global power. They'll be a little uncomfortable about the fact that Vladimir Putin has just been named by the International Criminal Court as an alleged war criminal. That takes a little bit of the pleasure out of the trip, I think, for President Xi. But also behind all this, one has to remember that Russia enters into this relationship, into this discussion today in Moscow and over the next couple of days as a very junior partner. Russia is highly dependent now on China, particularly since the impact of sanctions and the war with Ukraine. Has no other major country which it can turn to for trade in particular, which is growing fast, but not a substitute for the trade that Russia had before with the United States and the European Union. Plus, there are a number of issues that still exist in the background between China and Russia. The fact, for instance, that as far as the Chinese are concerned, Russia occupies Chinese territory from back in the 19th century. The Russians must know that the chips will be called in at some stage, and they're in competition in Central Asia, for instance. There are a lot of issues that at the moment are under the carpet because it's convenient for both sides. But down the line, everybody knows that China will call in those chips.
All right, Rob, thanks for that. France 24's chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons.